Erev Shabbat Shalom. We're here, Pashat Yitro, at least according to some of the commentators, the whole reason the world is created and comes into existence is so that the Jewish people can receive the Torah, which happens in the second part of this week's Torah portion. And the introduction to this week's Torah portion, there's the story of Jethro, of Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, who comes and brings Tzipporah, Moshe's his wife, and his two children. And there's this family that's reunited, and then Yitro, as every good father-in-law, comes and gives critical advice to Moses and tells Moses, you're doing it all wrong. If you want to do it right, you need to delegate, you need to create systematic change. And Moshe, in fact, adopts and appreciates that advice. And the Or HaChaim suggests the reason this story is placed here. There's a big debate whether the story happens before or after the giving of the Torah, but it is presented before the giving of the Torah. And the Or HaChaim says the reason it's placed here is to tell us that there's wisdom. Yesh chokhmah bagoyim. There's wisdom among the nations of the world. And you want to receive the Torah, you have to be able to acquire that wisdom. And only through that are you able to receive the Torah. And that's a beautiful message. But I want to add another twist, a twist that it pains me to say, but I feel important to share. Last Shabbat, as Shabbat ended here in Israel, still deep in the trauma in Texas, where a synagogue was attacked by, unfortunately, an unwell man who held the rabbi and three others hostage for nearly 11 hours till they were successful in their escape. And it reminds me of the reality of this world is that, as the Ibn Ezra of Avram Ibn Ezra, who lives in the golden age of Spain, in the time when Spanish Jewry is in love with its surroundings, yet Ibn Ezra comes and says, we often focus on the story before the giving of the Torah that's in this week's portion, chapter 18, leading to the giving of the Torah. But last week, at the very end of the Torah portion, we read about Amalek. We read about a nation that attacks Israel, seemingly for no reason, and seeks to cause harm. And the Ibn Ezra suggests there are many parallels in these two introductory stories to the giving of the Torah. That before we stand at Mount Sinai, we learn that sometimes the world is there to give us wisdom, and sometimes the world is there as a threat and as a foe, and we need to be vigilant against that. And from a textual perspective, there are many similarities between these two narratives. In both of them, Moses is told, Bechar lecha anashim, choose for you people to go out to war against Amalek, or choose for you people to be judges and to help delegate the responsibility of leading the people. In both places, in both narratives, Moshe is charged to sit. He sits when he goes out to war and his hands are up in prayer. And likewise with Yitro, he sits. He's going to war. It's Lilachem, and the story of Yitro is framed both in the beginning and in the end with a request for peace. And in fact, the Ibn Ezra suggests that we should look at the story of Amalek as a story of introduction to the giving of the Torah. And I want to pair these two stories together. And the message is one of complexity, that we live in a world in which there is wisdom and there is goodness in this world, and you can't receive the Torah unless you're able to recognize the wisdom of the world and the nations that surround the Jewish people. But at the same time, we must remain vigilant, must be aware that there are threats and there are foes, and we need to remain on guard with prayers that Jews throughout the world are able to express their Judaism without fear and without harassment, in peace and in harmony, from the Jewish people to the entire world. It should be a Shabbat of peace and of blessing and of goodness for us and for Jews everywhere. Shabbat shalom.